Chet. Wow, kid. Good. We are back for Tool Tuesday 96, I believe. I need to double check. This is Tool Tuesday 95. This is Tool Tuesday 95. And the craziest part is Tool Tuesday 94 was Do Not Look Down, right? So remember, I always would do Meshuggah, always come back with Meshuggah for Tool Tuesday, right? Obviously, classic, right? So the last Tool Tuesday was Meshuggah. And that Do Not Look Down was January 24th, 2023. It's been like exactly 2 years of a Tool Tuesday hiatus. This is not the first Tempest. This is the third Tempest I've done. I think the first Tool Tuesday ever was Tempest. It was the beginning of Tempest. So Tempest. I wrote a whole lesson on this. But really what this all comes down to is the mentality of practice. Tool Tuesday is the mentality of practice. See, the purpose of transcription and recreation fits exactly inside the mentality of practice, because the mentality of practice boils down to two goals. Okay, two goals. One goal, vocabulary expansion. Second goal, vocabulary execution. I've written an entire syllabus on this. Of course, that's in the school. But for now, you're good to know practice is two goals, right? Of course, vocabulary expansion, that's the process of studying music with the goal of integrating the benefits of that study into your own musical language, right? That's transcription. That's what you're doing. That's that study, that active work study, expanding the vocabulary. But the vocabulary execution, unavoidable. We live in the third dimension. That's the process of building out physical technique in such a way, of course, that it supports our ever-expanding vocabulary, right? Recreation, expanding vocabulary, trying to blur the line between creating and studying. Right? And consider, technique is not just the ability to play fast, it also is the ability to arrange and produce with impeccable accuracy, right? Levels and dimensions of technique, developing technique through recreation, studying music in the wild to mix up your inclinations, facilitating multi-strain languages. And now you're starting to see the power of the pyramids. See, after 100 Meshuggah Mondays, now approaching 100 Tool Tuesdays. Not only gained multiple lifetimes worth of musical vocabulary, but I've also built a robust technique that is adaptive to a vocabulary that is constantly expanding. Right, so the technical development, right, that's obvious. Of course, we're getting technical development by studying the music and recreating it, building out the technique. But the deeper implications pertain to form. Directly observing form in the wild is quite a phenomenon. What I mean by this is with Meshuggah, right, you observe a way that they're approaching form in the wild, right? You just start studying and you're like, oh, they're doing this very specific form thing. With Tool, it's like, okay, in the wild, okay, what are they doing with form? Oh, they're doing these very specific form things. And since we already know from first principles that form is going to give us the most bang for our creative buck, we can start to integrate that form vocabulary that we're seeing out in the wild, right? That big picture compositional vocabulary. From artists that we love, right? Artists where the music is specifically resonating. You know, if you're a composer, you want to write resonant music, right? So you're going to go look and study the music that resonates. Try to figure out why it resonates. And if you've been following the narrative, you already see it coming, right? That, of course, form and really studying the nature of form is really where all the power is actualized. See, the trip with form is that you literally have an infinite number of ways that you can think about it, but they all have something in common. What they all have in common is harmonic rhythm. Now, with jazz standards, that's one kind of harmonic rhythm, but with Meshuggah riffing, that's another kind of harmonic rhythm. With Tool, that's another kind of harmonic rhythm. They're all harmonic rhythm, but it's like, for example, with Tool, we can usually see that their harmonic rhythm is aligning to groups of 3s and 2s, right? Meshuggah, it's the same thing. With jazz standards, for example, the harmony only usually aligns to 4s and 8s. What's up with that? But you could really understand it as Tool has a lot of syncopated harmonic rhythm, right? Meshuggah has a lot of syncopated harmonic rhythm. A lot of those guitar riffing bands have like syncopated harmonic rhythms that are like riff driven and like very power chord driven, sometimes triad driven, but more often power chord or add 9 chord driven. You know what I mean? Like no third mentality. Rock riffing classics 101. So now you're starting to see a spectrum of possible forms, right? In my mind, I've got those 3 reference points, right? I got jazz standards, I've got Meshuggah, and I've got Tool. And I really understand form that way. And that's a result of just studying all the forms, right? I've been studying forms, right? Did all those Meshuggah forms, did all those Tool forms, plus probably played like 250 different jazz standards, internalized maybe 33 of those. So I know a thing or two about form. Now, the deepest understanding that is the benefit to you in this is that I've come to the realization that understanding form is the foundation of that boundless creativity that I speak of that applies to improvisation composition. But there's something about understanding it in the context of improvisation, right? Understanding how to improvise through form, how to respect form in real time and be able to speak through those forms with the same amount of effortlessness as you speak English when you're improvising a conversation. So that first form you understand, every form you add on top of it, it compounds. Because forever, you're going to be thinking of forms against that first form that you thought of, right? So for some people, it could be like 1-4-5 blues is the first form they ever thought of. You should use that as a reference point when you're deep in the weeds of Fear Inoculum. You know what I mean? Like deep secret, hiding in plain sight, of course, but the album's too trippy. No one can even find that part. Do you even recognize that? That might be one of the all-time pinnacle moments of all Tool. Know what I'm saying, dude? All right, so like I said, once you understand one form, then every form you understand thereafter will compound your understanding of form at large, right? And as a result, your awareness with regards to the very substance of musical creation expands exponentially, right? One form, understand it, compound it with 2 forms, compound that with 3 forms, exponential, right? Starts with that first form, deep mastery. Ask JD about the turbo booster.
Oh, yeah. It's great.
Yeah.
The turbo booster is great.
I told you, man! This thing works, dude. And of course, now we're getting into a whole other topic that I've also written an entire syllabus on, and this is the topic of musical precedent, right? Form and musical precedent are intrinsically, fundamentally connected. In real time, the precedent is the form, right? So then, what's the precedent surrounding the nature of form itself? Well, I'll put it this way. Probably the most important thing you're going to need to understand if you want to realize the infinite creativity glitch, but almost more importantly, right? It's actually the conceptual technique that you need to create music that is deeply potent, deeply impactful, and specifically resonant. Resonance is quantifiable. Just like you remember in the last video, we're moving towards objectivity because that's how we kill the inner critic. And the inner critic operates on many levels. One of the deepest ones is real-time improvisation. Think about what I'm saying to you. How can we shift our focus from the inner critic? It's simple. We just start considering the precedent. We focus on the precedent. Right? The precedent could be the form. The precedent could be 32 bar AABA. Could be a special accent T-high. Could be 3-3-2. If we're focusing on the precedent, we begin to generate the feedback loop, right? Now, some people might call this the flow state, but consider the feedback loop analogy. See, it's the feedback loop of precedent, you see. See, what I mean by this is in every musical decision at all levels of time, right? Real time, expanded time, every musical decision will either resonate with that feedback loop or it will not, right? It can grow the feedback loop, grow the intensity, grow the vibe, right? And it's a little bit of a balance point, right? It's tricky to maintain that resonance. But if you're just focusing on that precedent, whatever that precedent is, the last rhythm you played, the rhythm your bandmate just played, the form at large, a specific shot in the form. If you're focusing on those things, the feedback loop gets louder and bigger and more robust, and we all feel it, and we all sink deeper down into the vibe. Getting deep into that vibe takes specific work and understanding, and that work is research a lot of the time. The only thing that makes research even more effective is when you combine it with recreation. Make a whole freaking exercise out of the thing. Take pride in this practice system of studying precedent and expanding on it. You have to find a relationship to those precedents. You have to understand the precedents. It's not to say that you're copying other artists per se, but you might, right? You might end up actually copying them. And that happens at all different levels once again, right? Ubiquitous forms like rhythm changes. Did Miles Davis and Sonny Rollins copy George Gershwin when they wrote Oleo against rhythm changes? It's like, yeah, but it was the best idea they ever had, you know? They understood exactly how to leverage the precedent. And what happens is in music, which is really interesting, is that when you do that, it's like the vibe is created, right? They just use a good old-fashioned rhythm changes AABA, and the vibe is super strong, right? The form brings the vibe. You keep the form alive, the vibe shows up, right? The form is like your book of spells, right? It's like telling you what to do to get that vibe going. So your ability to play form is essentially the ability to reinforce vibe. And see, if we adopt that jazz mentality surrounding form, then we can look at this tool form as like no different than Miles Davis and Sonny Rollins were looking at a George Gershwin form, right? There's a harmonic rhythm through a certain period of bars. How can we respect that harmonic rhythm? How can we leverage that precedent to stay deep inside the resonance? Now, the thing is, you can't be trying to do this ignorantly, right? You literally need to have knowledge of precedent and an understanding of how precedent has been leveraged in the past. That's the key. And now we're talking about compounding levels of precedent once again. I mean, when you get down to the classics, right? Only 12 notes, right? So there's a finite amount of combinations of notes within the 12-tone system, right? But then it's like, what is the precedent of organizing those 12 notes? And of course, I've created an entire syllabus on this as well. But to give you the most reductively simplistic answer to the question of what is the precedent of 12-tone system, well, of course, I'm going to tell you that it boils down to triadic configurations through form, right? Or maybe harmonic sequence would have been a better choice than form right there. However, form and harmonic sequence, those are interchangeable terms because of harmonic rhythm, and the idea of harmonic rhythm and form is they're inseparable. Theoretically, you could have a form with no harmonic rhythm, but it would still have a rhythm. So the moment you put notes to it, then it would have a harmonic rhythm. So form, harmonic sequence, harmonic rhythm, that's a triangle of words that all mean the same thing, but it's important to understand the three aspects of that triangle. But now that you have that reductively simplistic understanding of 12-tone precedent, you can imagine there is a whole canon of precedent with regards to rhythm, right? And more specifically form. We literally call this rhythmic frameworks. We have an entire syllabus written on this. So now getting into frickin' Tempest finally, right? There is a very specific form that functions as the parameter of the composition, right? That form takes a few different shapes throughout the piece. However, in the excerpt that I've selected here, the form can be understood simply as 4 blocks of 21/8. 4 blocks of 21/8, right? Who cares? That barely means anything. But there's a specific organization of the 21/8, okay, which is 4/4 plus 13/8, right? And that's what you're always hearing. You're always hearing like dot 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 pow. And this form's got literal intergalactic dimensions of rhythmic precedent, okay? So one level, of course, would be the Treccio, right? That's the 3-3-2 framework. We've been talking about that for ever, right? The essential motive of the entire 21/8 groove is coming from that 3-3-2 Treccio, right? So it's 3-3-2 and then 3-3-3-2-2. What? And I went in depth about that whole thing in the video, which you should check out if you're a seriously dedicated practitioner of music. Watch this video. Goes seriously deep. But the real bottom line I'm trying to get to is that the majority of tool riffs use the Treccio, the 3-3-2 rhythm, right? With an even larger majority of those tool riffs just being little derivations or expansions on the Treccio, right? And that's exactly what Tempest is, right? So it's an expansion on the 3-3-2, right? Because it's like 3-3-2, and then it's like 3-3-3-2-2. Like, I'm not gonna try. It's not just like call response built into one asymmetrical riff, right? It's asymmetrical, right? 4-4 plus 13, 8. Like, it's just form. It's just harmonic rhythm and form, because that 3-3-2, 3-3-3, 2-2 has a harmonic rhythm, which is the riff, and you have to play along with that if you want to keep that vibe, right? And that's where it's like, okay, now the practice compounds level deeper. We're getting to it, dude. We're getting to it. You know where we're going. You know what always happens on Tool Tuesday? You know where I'm building up to. It's like real-time precedent wielding 101, right? But now, just quickly, consider the origins of the Tresillo, right? So it's like, what is this, like predate human recorded history or something? It's probably classic T-highs, like way ancient, right? But this one really caught on, like, you know, in the last 100 years, you got like probably thousands, maybe tens of thousands of songs based on a Tresillo. Obviously, the entire genre of reggaeton is based on the Tresillo, right? Highly ubiquitous rhythm / form, right? You can understand the Tresillo is a very short and simple form, right? But it's a form nonetheless, and it's responsible for, you know, probably tens of thousands of songs, like I said. So that makes it a ubiquitous form. It has precedent, right? So if you use it, there's that resonance, right? Even if I just go da back boom back boom, that had vibe right there. Because I'm literally just anchored into that classic first principle component, that ubiquitous little form. And right, this is just that whole thing, right? It's like throughout history, we see examples of great composers stealing, right, forms or ideas or whatever. And with that in mind, you know there's going to be specifically resonant forms, and you're going to know those forms by studying the music that you love and be like, that's sick. I got to figure out what's going on there. What you're trying to figure out is what the form is. What slippery little trick did these guys do to the form? Because everyone who writes bangers, it's because they understand form. It's all about that slippery little trick with the form, because you're just sequencing basic components all the time. What are your slippery little macro tricks that filter down into the sequencing of your micro components? The same ubiquitous forms, they just keep coming back. Blues, right? Rhythm changes, bird blues. How many bird blueses? And then you got deepers. You got the whole idea of contrafact, or you have the whole like transcendental contrafact. Like, for example, satellite based on how high the moon. What the hell is that? That's subverting precedent, right? That's like using the precedent in ways I literally don't have language to describe, but you're just going to understand it by studying the music yourself. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is if you have that bulletproof foundation of triadic fluency that you can apply to any form of any harmonic rhythm. That's the spaceship that you need to traverse the cosmos. The cosmos are the forms. They're the tunes, right? The feedback loop of precedent, right, echoes through the galaxy, right, all the way down to real-time improvisation when you're sequencing triad configurations in real time. All right, and speaking of improvisation, dude, let's see what happens when I try to keep the form, right? In 21-8, right? Here we go. Respect the precedent. Leverage the precedent. Don't let the inner critic kill the vibe, but I know how to do that. All I have to do is focus on the form, focus on the precedent, play the melody, play the harmonic rhythm, harmonize the melody, play variations on the melody. I'm just telling myself what to do as I go, and I'm now going to improvise over this 21. And obviously on a whole other level, right, building my technique, doing Tool Tuesday and Meshuggah Monday where I solo and improvise through the form, right, leveraging the precedent, feeding back that precedent in my improvisation, killing the inner critic, drowning it out with feedback. I've developed some disgusting technique, if I do say so myself. My technique in the past 10 years has exponentially turbo shot in ways I only dreamed about. And it was literally because I started thinking about music all differently, right? I would say 10 years ago, no, not even, like 8 years ago is when I really started to understand things. And now my whole thing is now I can show you guys the benefit of all that knowledge, right? I wrote it out in a whole syllabus, right? Because I had to understand it. I had to understand how to think to actually solve my own problems, right? And I wrote that down, the whole syllabus. We got the live classes. Come to class 3 days a week. Let's talk about the syllabus. Let's turn you into a freaking musical genius, show you the mentality of practice, show you transcription and recreation, dude, and show you real-time musical creation. right, so if you felt the vibe on that, look at the website and the link, mentalitymusic.com/systems for creation. All right. We'll see you there. Let's talk. Let's see if we can get you in this program, right? Book a call. You're still watching. I literally have time to speak with you if you're a serious musician with aspirations to radically subvert the paradigm. I have time to speak with you. So book a freaking call if my calendar's open. Speak to you soon.